Today I wanted to share with you the top pelvic floor exercises for urinary incontinence. I just want to show real quick just the anatomy here, because I think sometimes just having the vision of why for women urinary incontinence is such an issue. If you can kind of see here, bladder sitting here on this front side, and then you can see uterus is sitting right up over top of where bladder is. So bladder gets a lot of pressure on it throughout the day with movement patterns, getting in and out of your car, sit to stand, etc. So it's important to know, how am I going to give that bladder the good support that it needs from the musculoskeletal system and the fascial tissue that actually helps support where the bladder actually lies. So there's key muscles that we're looking at to kind of stabilize and give information around that area. And think of it, if I don't have deep abdominal muscle control, remember that's part of the deep core, these deep abdominal muscles are powerful to do what? To lift and to hold the bladder and keep it in position. So I'm just going to share with you 5 different exercises. They're easy exercises to do, and it'll start you on your way. And as we go through it, the only thing I'm going to use today is a little towel, and I'm going to just throw it down because our first one is for your feet. And I know a lot of you are wondering, what in the world do my feet and the arch of my foot have to do with my pelvic floor? Well, think of it, if my arch is not strong enough, it will allow the pelvic floor and all the hips to sort of roll in. So it rolls it in, and the pelvic floor then has to overwork if I have hips that are not strong enough as the arch drops down. So having a strong, powerful arch helps keep the floor's tonal pattern more even and steady, so the floor doesn't have to overwork. So if you just grab a little towel, throw it on the ground, all you're going to do is take your bare foot. Sometimes there's some great research right now that's come out about being barefoot when you actually do a lot of the pelvic floor training exercises, because it's almost like it gives more input, or what we call proprioception, to the brain, and it kind of lights that brain up to be like, oh wow, I know where these muscles are when my feet are literally on the ground in that barefoot position. So what you're going to do is you're just going to take your little towel, and you can do towel scrunches just like this, and you're just going to pull that towel. The arch then is actually contracting and working. As that arch contracts and works, I'm also getting a contraction to the floor, and that tonal pattern in the floor is increasing. And we want more control, and then when we let go of the contraction with my arch, guess what happens? The floor relaxes. So I'm contracting, the floor is contracting with my arch, and then as I relax my foot, the floor also relaxes. So these arch ups are a great way to do that. You can use a towel. If you don't have a towel nearby, you can literally do what we call an arch up, and that's just that you keep your toes nice and flat to the floor, and then all you're doing is almost like you have a little string and you're pulling your arch up in towards your nose. As you do so, you automatically get nice contraction and overflow to the floor, so you're getting information to the floor to start to work. Your next exercise is going to be your deep abdominal muscles with a hip motion. Why are we doing this? Because we need some stability out of our hip and out of the deep abdominal muscles. The deep abdominal muscles, the transverse and the internal oblique, they work together through their fascial line to do what? To actually lift and hold bladder in position. I don't mean walking around and a full posterior tilt. That's not what we're after. We're after a light pull up and in. As we do so, we know that it lifts the bladder up, so that bladder kind of has better containment, and it helps give stability to the urethra and to the tissue of the floor so that I get better closure. So we know even if you're laughing or sneezing or coughing, sometimes I'll just tell people, hey, take a little step, pull your belly muscles up and in, and as you bend your knees lightly like that, the floor automatically contracts so that I don't get leakage during laughing, sneezing, coughing, etc. So that transverse abdominis contraction is awesome to stabilize and give support to the bladder. The next thing that you can do with that transverse abdominis pull in is then you're going to take your hip and you're going to rotate it up and then out. So you'll do a tap with your toes to your knee, and then a tap out to the side. So tap in and tap out while you keep this transverse abdominis muscles contracted. Remember, there's a group of muscles on either side of the hip called the obturator internus. They lie in the floor, they support the bladder from each side, and when you do this motion, they actually contract. So when you lift up and then you tap out, they contract on the lift up, and then they stretch on the out motion. So that hip internal and external rotation here, internal rotation there, it helps stabilize the floor and that bladder from either side. So think of it, the transverse abdominis stabilizes the bladder from the front. The hip external rotation stabilizes the bladder from either side to give support to the bladder. If you might have an overactive bladder, the outside tapping of this motion stretches that tissue, so it actually makes more room for the bladder as well. Your third exercise then is going to be to get into a bent knee position. So you're going to go here just a little bend. Again, my feet are flat to the floor, right? I'm not going to let my legs roll in or roll out when I do this, right? As I do it, I'm kind of squared up under my shoulders. I'm bent, and I'm actually going to go up into a nice little heel raise. We know on that heel raise when we go up, what happens is the floor automatically has to contract. It gets overflow to it. If you're not sure if it's contracting, what you're going to do is lightly do a little closure at the urethral sphincter. You can also do a little closure at anal sphincter as you go up. So I'll lightly lift at anal sphincter, so little closure, like you're going to stop from passing gas, like you're going to stop from having a leaky bladder, right? Like you're going to close the sphincter. You're going to go to your tiptoes, a little hold, and then back and down. Your next exercise, which would be your fourth exercise, is a little mini squat with trunk rotation. Why do we care about trunk rotation? If I'm stiff in my trunk rotators, and remember, these are the guys that are my obliques and my transverse abdominis that come all the way around. And the transverse, remember, in the obliques, they do what? They help support the bladder. Think of it, a lot of people will say to me, hey, I went to get out of my car, or I went to sit to stand, and all of a sudden I leaked. If these muscles through this region are either too tight or not strong enough, they give what? Poor stability and support to where the bladder lies. So getting into a nice little mini squat, remember that helps the floor muscles contract, so I can do a little bit of a lift of the floor while I'm here. And then I'm going to do a nice trunk rotation to the right and to the left. As I do so, I'm teaching these muscles to do what? To help contain the air that I'm using in and out. Because if I don't utilize a good containment of air pressure system, I might bear down into my floor, and that also makes me pee, right? So loosening these muscles helps that whole diaphragm work. And remember, your diaphragm, which is up high in here, it should be able to expand your ribs 2 to 3 inches. And if I don't get good rib expansion because I'm too tight with all these big lateral trunk muscles, then I will not be able to have very good air management or air pressure system management. And then I might push into the bladder, and I might get leaking to the bladder because other visceral organs will push down on the bladder and cause the bladder to have leakage. So the more mobility I have out of the side wall of my trunk, the better off I am. So oftentimes I test people and see, hey, how much trunk rotation do they have? Why am I not doing it in standing, full standing, and not the squat? Because in full standing, oftentimes, what can I do? I can cheat with the whole rest of my body, going right and left to do my rotation. And I don't want that cheating. I want to know specifically how much mobility, how much power, how much strength do I have out of the side wall of my trunk. So getting in this nice position squat, remember I was saying how everything should be nice and aligned. Remember, hip, knee, second toe. If your feet are out here, that is not a good position to actually train the floor and train the trunk in. Why is that? Because then I'm going to get overflow of other muscles in the floor that are working too hard. I might get glute working too hard. I might get obturator internus working too hard. So when we first start training for these mini squat trunk rotations, what are we going to do? We're going to be in what we call the position of power. The position of power is a stacking between lower and upper girdle, and hip, knee, second toe are nice and lined up. That way, when I'm doing this motion, I'm getting a true idea of, oh, how much trunk rotation do I have? Don't get me wrong, you're getting some hip motion too, but we're gonna mitigate that and we're gonna get better control. We get more activation, well, I should say improved activation of the floor in that position when we're here. So easy to do, great way to decide, hey, how much rib mobility, how much sidewall trunk motion do I have? Okay, so our last one, our fifth one, is a side lunge. And in this side lunge position, then I can elongate the floor. So some of you have a very hypertensive, short floor, it's too tight, and you're thinking, oh, I was supposed to be doing Kegels so that I wouldn't wet my pants, and man, I did a million of them and it never worked. Remember, that part of the floor might be too taut and too tight. So we're going to elongate that floor while we're actually doing the exercise, and it works so well to actually facilitate a contraction. And then guess what? You and I are out in the world and we're doing motions, or we're laughing, coughing, sneezing. Our body's already used to having the tone that it needs in order to support that floor in more elongated positions, because often that's when it happens, is in elongated positions. So this next one is just going to be a nice little side lunge. I'm going to get in side lunge position. Think of it, I'm releasing adductor, and adductor's release does what? It lets the first layer of the floor do what? Have a little bit of relaxation, more elongation here. I can do what here? I can do anal sphincter contractions. So I could do 5 quick anal sphincter contractions. I could do 5 quick stop the flow of urine contraction. Why am I saying that? Because sometimes it's easier to teach the body to do quick contractions first before long sustained contractions. And think of it, after every major contraction that we do, we always get a major relaxation. So those of you who have a little hypertensive floor, this is a great position to be in to train the floor. So now I can do short contractions, quick, fast twitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I can say, oh, I'm going to challenge it a little bit more, and I'm going to do a longer hold. A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 contraction, long hold. So that way I'm training both sets of muscles in that side lunge position. I can also, in that same position, if I feel like everything is so stiff and so tight there, and I might want to loosen everything up a little bit more before I actually train the floor, what you can do is you can side lunge, and now I'll turn sideways so you can see me a little bit better. I can side lunge, and now I'll do what? A posterior tilt. The floor contracts on a posterior tilt, right? And then I release and I go forward and I get more elongation to the floor. So I can posterior tilt and I can anterior tilt. I can posterior tilt, so contraction and more elongation on anterior tilt. Why am I saying that in that position? Because sometimes the side lunge is a great way to loosen things up through the pelvis, through the hips, let the floor, if the floor has restrictions and tightness, not have so much, containment or so much restriction present. So great position. Those are your 5 top pelvic floor exercises for urinary incontinence in the standing position. Thanks for being here.